HOA kept draining the solar battery like it was free energy. But the wiring worked both ways. So now, every stolen watt triggers their sprinkler system at exactly 2:03 a.m. Lawn-perfect tyrants wanted power for free. Now they get soaked in their sleep. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. HOA kept draining the solar battery like it was theirs, until the wiring bit back. At exactly 2:03 a.m., every stolen watt triggered a watery ambush. Sprinklers exploded, soaking board members mid-scheme, drenching robes, and flooding lies. They wanted free power, but they woke up to wet justice. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. They say when you move somewhere new, you bring two things with you: what you hope to escape and what you hope to build. For me, that meant silence, sunlight, and systems that didn't depend on anyone else. After 12 years in a cramped city apartment above a noisy bar and beneath an even noisier couple, I finally cashed in my savings and bought a modest single-story home at the edge of a manicured suburban loop called Sandpiper Hollow. The kind of place where the lawns are too green and the smiles are just a little too tight. But my house sat on the far end of the loop, tucked between an old creek bed and a patch of unused HOA-maintained field. To most, it was the weird corner lot. To me, it was peace. I spent the first 3 weeks settling in, setting up my solar rig, digging compost trenches, installing my rain barrel system. I didn't need a lawn crew or a cable subscription. What I needed was independence, power from the sun, veggies from the yard, and a few old paperbacks under the porch fan. I still remember the first morning I brewed coffee using just stored solar energy. That quiet hum from the kettle. It felt like victory. But then, little things. Tiny signs that something wasn't syncing up. It started with the battery. I have a 14 kWh lithium unit, plenty of capacity for my usage. I monitored the draw daily. Always have. But I began to notice weird dips overnight. At first, I thought I'd left the mini fridge door ajar. Or maybe the inverter was cycling inefficiently. I rechecked the system. Everything was in spec. Yet somehow, each night between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., the battery would drop 10, then 15. I tried sleeping through it, chalking it up to settling, system stress, or maybe even a learning curve. But something kept gnawing at me. It wasn't just power vanishing. It was control, autonomy, something I thought I'd finally earned, slipping away in silence. And then came the letter, folded neatly inside a glossy trifold newsletter labeled Sandpiper Hollow. Monthly Moments was a courtesy notice. Printed in soft blue ink, it read, "Dear resident, we noticed some elements of your exterior design may fall outside of the community's aesthetic harmony guidelines. This includes but is not limited to non-regulation solar panel visibility and use of unconventional rain capture devices. We'd love to schedule a compliance consultation. Warm, your Sandpiper HOA board." They called it aesthetic harmony. I called it the first red flag, because I knew exactly what they meant. My solar rig, raised on angled mounts for winter sun, was visible from the road. So was my DIY irrigation pipe running from the rain barrel to the planter bed. It wasn't messy, it wasn't loud, it just wasn't uniform. And uniformity, I was beginning to realize, was their religion. Still, I stayed calm. I hadn't moved out here to argue with clipboard commandos or debate grass height. I had moved for simplicity, for quiet, for freedom. But now that quiet was being siphoned. Literally. So I did what my old mentor once told me: log everything, then look again. I installed a second battery monitor, digital time-stamped and paired to an offline logger. I even added a motion sensor by the utility box, just in case. And that's when the patterns emerged. Every spike in battery drain correlated with a blip in the motion log. Soft footsteps, a flicker of movement near the eastern hedgerow. That's the moment something shifted in me. Not anger, not yet, just awareness. That quiet, cold hum of someone stepping into your boundaries, not with force, but with quiet fingers and disguised wires. I moved here for peace, but I wasn't going to let peace become permission. And whoever was draining my system, they weren't just stealing power, They were stealing the one thing I'd fought like hell to rebuild: control. So I went back to my blueprints, pulled up every watt, every relay, every inch of buried conduit, and I began to rewire the story. Quietly, deliberately, one connection at a time. At first I thought it was just bad luck, maybe a surge or phantom load somewhere in the system. But the pattern became undeniable. Every night, the charge on my battery dropped like clockwork. Not gradually, not through normal background draw. It plunged from 87% to 22%, always between 1 hour a.m. and I wasn't running anything major overnight. No AC, no heaters, fridge compressor barely ticked. The logs from my solar inverter confirmed it. My entire system, including the smart plugs, barely sipped power after midnight. So what was sucking down kilowatts like a starving ghost? I needed proof, not just hunches. I installed a passive energy monitor on the output leads, a little device I found through a DIY off-grid forum. It tracked amperage draw in real time, down to the second, and time-stamped everything. No network connection, no Wi-Fi, just clean local logs. Then I waited. The first night, quiet, no significant drain. I went to bed feeling paranoid and petty. But the second night, 1:42 a.m. Spike. Not a blip, a sustained draw of 3.8 kWs, holding for 18 minutes straight. I sat up in bed like I'd been yanked by a wire myself, ran barefoot to the system cabinet and stared at the screen. Still pulling. And it was coming from the rear fence line. The conduit that ran from the inverter, out through the buried PVC to the east garden, and terminated in a sealed utility box near the edge of my property. No way! I pulled on jeans, boots, and grabbed a flashlight, kept it off as I moved through the yard, heart pounding louder than my steps. The wind was light, sky was clear. Stars overhead, like distant warning lights. The utility box looked untouched. No tampering, no broken seal. But when I held my hand near the side panel, I felt it heat, faint but wrong. That box was supposed to be cold unless I was running the irrigation pump, and I hadn't been. I unscrewed the back panel and tilted the flashlight. There, nestled between the neutral bar and the grounding bolt, was a small copper tap, soldered clean, wrapped in matching insulation. Someone had piggybacked my power. I followed the line. It was subtle, buried, but shallow. A newer conduit, not code color, running along the hedgerow that divided my lot from the common area behind the HOA's clubhouse garden. I texted Jason, an old friend from college, who now worked as a residential electrician. He owed me a favor and was just curious enough to show up by noon the next day with a multimeter, a splice kit, and a thermos full of coffee. We traced the line together. He tested voltage on the tap. Live, he said. Same polarity. Someone bridged this direct from your inverter's outflow. No breaker, no regulation. That's not just theft, that's dangerous. We kept tracing. The conduit snaked under the hedgerow and right into a utility junction box mounted on the backside of the HOA's sprinkler control post. Jason opened the panel, paused, and let out a low whistle. They wired your power straight into their irrigation relay, he said. I blinked. You're serious? Dead serious. This whole sprinkler grid, it's running on your solar. He showed me the backfeed. A makeshift converter routed the DC into a sub-inverter, which powered the water pressure booster for the entire neighborhood's irrigation system, at least the eastern half. I stepped back and looked at the nearby sidewalk. Right there, at the foot of the path, was one of those polished brass plaques. Sustainably watered by Pine Creek HOA, Community Innovation in Action. Community innovation. I nearly laughed. They'd tapped my solar power without permission, without compensation, and dressed it up as eco-conscious HOA pride. Jason looked at me. What do you want to do? I didn't answer right away, because part of me wanted to rip the whole thing out and drag it into their boardroom. But another part, the one that had studied quiet resistance and outsmarted bureaucracy before, was already planning something different. Something subtle. Something with wires. Because if they wanted to use my power without asking, then I'd let them. On my terms. The line snaked where it shouldn't, and where it ended rewrote everything I thought I knew about my home. The voltage logs hadn't lied. The pattern was too specific to ignore. and my suspicions too sharp to put off any longer. So I followed it. I started in daylight, gloves on, clippers in hand, tracing the subtle shift in soil where the hedgerow met the fence line. What looked like ordinary landscaping turned surgical the closer I looked. Disturbed mulch, a buried tension, and a slight convex bulge where no root should push up. Just past the hydrangeas, beneath a half-buried decorative stone, I found it, a gray, unmarked box. Weatherproof, industrial grade, wired to something beneath the surface. I took a breath, popped the latches, and opened it. Inside, it was like staring into a crime scene staged by someone who assumed no one would ever come looking. A cheap inverter, a patched-together relay, a jury-rigged switchboard with mismatched screws and black market serial numbers, and spliced wires, 3 of them cutting directly into the return conduit for my solar array. The power wasn't just leaking, it was being redirected. They'd installed a covert tap, rerouting juice from my battery straight to an auxiliary circuit. At first I thought, lighting, maybe, some HOA office function. But the labeling betrayed them. Buried under wire caps and dust was a faded strip of masking tape, scribbled in black marker. Zones 1-6, Rainbird. Sprinklers. Their entire lawn system was leaching power from me. And then came the kicker. The date etched faintly on a soldered tab inside the casing. Not the install date for my panels, not even my closing date. 3 weeks before I moved in. They'd wired this before I ever stepped foot on the property. My hands went cold. This wasn't accidental or desperate. It was calculated. Someone on the HOA board, or whoever they hired, had prepped this theft in advance, assuming the next buyer would be clueless or compliant. Probably both. I was meant to be a passive donor, unaware while their front lawns stayed perfectly green and guilt-free. But I had voltage alarms, I had logs, and now I had proof. I took pictures. Every angle, serial numbers, wiring paths, the inverter model. Then I closed the box without disturbing anything further. No confrontation, no calls. I needed to think, because the way I saw it, I had 2 choices. Report them, rewrite the script entirely. And quietly, in that moment beneath the hydrangeas, the second option started to grow in me like a seed in rich stolen soil. The old me might have just pulled the plug, cut the conduit, filed a complaint, waited for a hearing date that would never come, hosted by a board that wouldn't care. That's what they expected. That's what they'd seen before. But I didn't move here to play defense. So I didn't just stop the theft. I installed a consequence. First, I bought a voltage-sensitive microcontroller online, a tiny silent thing the size of a flash drive. Custom programmable, capable of responding to draw thresholds in real time. Took me a full weekend to calibrate it with Jason's help. But by Monday night we had it ready. We didn't disconnect their line. We rerouted it. We spliced in a smart relay, one that wouldn't stop power from flowing, but would listen. It was wired with a simple command. If the outbound voltage dropped below a specific threshold, say 25% battery at any point after 1 a.m., the system would quietly trip a second command line. And that command, it would signal their own sprinkler controller to launch a full zone-wide override. Not the normal, rotation-based 10-minute cycle they used for eco-watering. No, every zone, full pressure for exactly 43 minutes. And at 2:03 a.m. Why 2 in the 3? Because their camera system reset at 2:00 a.m., caught in its own reboot window. A flaw Diane bragged about once at a community barbecue. We schedule our uploads to the cloud at 2 a.m. so it doesn't disrupt normal monitoring. I'd remembered that. I wanted them drenched. Not just wet-soaked, soggy lawns, dripping sidewalks, sprinkler geysers hammering against garage doors and garden gnomes. I wanted every water waste violation they'd ever cited a neighbor for, pointed right back at them. And the best part, they'd trigger it themselves. Every single time they got greedy. Every time they pulled power they weren't entitled to, the sprinkler system would punish them. Not with sirens. Not with lawsuits. With irony. The installation was clean. No tampering on their side. No visible changes. The relay we used was tucked inside my own side of the fence, technically my property, my box, and wired only to intercept what they were stealing. The first night, I waited. At 1:41 a.m., the battery dropped to 2. The relay clicked on. 2 minutes later, I saw it, the first spurt of mist in the air. Then the pressure cranked. A full blast of water shot across the decorative stone path behind the HOA's garden commons. Lights flicked on inside a few houses. One man stepped out in his slippers, arms out like he'd wandered into a car wash. Sprinklers sprayed in full force, front lawns, side yards, common benches, even the signboard. I sat on my porch in the dark, a thermos in hand, and just listened. The rhythmic hiss-hiss-psh of overworked valves. The high-pitched whine of pumps struggling to keep up. A burst of mist rode the breeze straight to my face, and I couldn't help but smile. Let them explain that to their landscape contractor. Let Diane call in another maintenance crew. Let them wonder if it was a glitch, a software issue, a power spike from the city grid. Because they'd never suspect what was actually happening. They thought I was just the new off-grid guy with the compost bin and the ugly hedgerow. They didn't realize I had teeth. The next night, they stole again. And again the sprinklers came alive, like ghosts of every rule they'd ever twisted, rising up in syncopated arcs of chlorinated revenge. By the third night, I noticed they'd added motion lights near the HOA shed. By the fourth, a plumber's van sat outside till morning. But the theft continued. So did the waterworks. They could try all the diagnostics they wanted. Replace timers, swap controllers, call their manufacturer. It wouldn't matter, because the problem wasn't in their wiring. It was in mine. And the more they tried to fix it, the more I knew I was winning. The first night was silent. Battery dipped. Trigger primed. Nothing. I waited on the porch with my thermos and a quiet kind of hope. Maybe they'd figured it out. Maybe my line reroutes spooked them off. But thieves don't usually stop at a whisper. They get sloppy when no one screams. On the second night, it hit 2:03 a.m. on the dot. I heard the soft pop of water pressure snap through PVC. The hiss, the stuttering cough of the mainline valves catching. Then the unmistakable whoosh of 8 sprinkler heads erupting into the night like geysers. I couldn't see them directly from my porch, but I didn't need to. The sound carried across the cul-de-sac like a guilty confession. 2 minutes later, lights flicked on across the HOA's common green. A side door slammed. A man in a gray robe, Greg the treasurer, sprinted out into the middle of the lawn like someone had just dumped a bucket over his head. And in a way, only it was his own sprinkler system. The third night was art. I'd just set the motion dash cam to record when the sequence began. Battery dipped to 24%. Trigger flipped. Right on cue, the HOA grounds transformed into an aquatic comedy sketch. 4 different heads of the HOA, Greg, Diane, some guy with a clipboard I'd never seen before, and a woman yelling into a walkie were all standing there mid-inspection when the sprinklers exploded beneath their feet. Chaos. Diane screamed and tried to shield herself with a laminated landscaping report. Greg just cursed loud enough that I heard it through the hedgerow. They all scattered like pigeons at a train whistle, slipping on wet cobblestone, dodging blasts from their own irrigation rig. But here's the twist. When they checked their logs, nothing. Power draw? Normal. Timer settings? Intact. Sprinkler controller? Untouched. They reset the system, even swapped out the controller. They had a maintenance tech standing out there by night with a flashlight and a frown, unplugging and replugging wires while muttering about firmware loops and outdated schedules. And still, every few nights, like clockwork. Whoosh! Midnight fountains. Water blasting up like laughter from underground. HOA officers, running like school kids, caught TPing a principal's house. The best part, they couldn't file a complaint, because technically nothing was being damaged. No property line crossed, no law broken. It was their sprinkler system following its own programming. I didn't brag, didn't mention a word to the neighbors. I just sat out back every night with my thermos and listened. The HOA tried to blame faulty valves. They called in a new contractor. I saw him, red shirt, tool belt, dead eyes. He replaced the timer. Again. Then came the community memo. Residents may experience temporary inconsistencies in irrigation schedules as we work through a technical fault in the main system controller. Thank you for your patience. Translation? They had no idea what was happening. And that meant I could keep going. Because every time they stole my solar power, they got soaked. Not by me. by themselves. And somewhere in all that splashing and shouting, I hoped they were starting to understand what karma looked like. Dripping, confused, and out of excuses. Ever caught a thief red-handed using your own sunlight? If you've ever battled a rule-happy HOA, been outnumbered but never outsmarted, you're in the right place. We don't just tell stories here. We wire justice into every line. And the next tripwire might just have your name on it. You don't build a countermeasure overnight. I spent 2 days rewiring the patch box. Clean, deliberate. I left the original draw line intact, but inserted a microcurrent sensor between the relay and the outbound line, hidden under a soldered insulation sleeve. It wasn't connected to any breaker. It wasn't even connected to the grid. It was connected to a message. The moment someone tampered with it, that sensor would trigger a false status code on the HOA's own irrigation controller, one I'd cloned earlier using their model's debug interface. The screen would flash exactly once. Unauthorized access, event log, no real alarm, no power surge, just a line of digital doubt burned into the system memory, like a fingerprint left on glass. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, a white truck pulled up to the HOA's sidewalk garden. Unmarked van, ladder rack, tool belt guy, contractor, the kind who gets paid to fix what his client swears is broken, even if there's no problem at all. I stayed inside, lights off, camera on, watching from the bay window behind the fern. He crouched by the control panel, popped the irrigation box open, swapped gloves. That told me everything. He was here to find something off the books. Then he followed the conduit line, under the mulch. He paused near the hydrangeas, the ones I never watered, but they always looked freshly misted. His hand brushed the topsoil, then froze. He dug slow, professional, too professional, found the box, opened it, and clipped the top wire. Right then, less than 2 seconds later, the trigger sent the command. Not to me, not to my system, to theirs. Their irrigation controller backlit itself and blinked like it always did at cycle reset. Only this time, the screen read, unauthorized access. Zone override detected. Event logged. The guy stared at the screen. Shoulders stiff. He typed something into his phone, a message or a panic ping. I'll never know. But he didn't touch the wires again. He didn't repair anything. He didn't even close the box. He left it ajar, half buried, and walked back to the truck like someone who'd just picked up a cursed object and needed to get far fast. By sundown, the truck was gone. By midnight, I had a new camera pointed at the junction. And at 12:47 a.m., someone knocked. 2 sharp taps. Not aggressive. Just loud enough to announce intent. I didn't answer. I didn't move. They waited 15 seconds and left a note. I found it in the morning, wedged under the welcome mat. I never touched. Typed. No signature. Please let us know if you've experienced irregularities with shared neighborhood systems. HOA maintenance may need to coordinate usage protocols. Thank you for your cooperation. Shared neighborhood systems. Nice try. They didn't know if I knew. They didn't know if I'd seen the guy, if I'd logged the log, if I even cared. But I did, because that message wasn't just passive. It was a warning wrapped in denial. A white-gloved threat. A final tug before the whole thread unraveled. They were circling the wire like it could still save them. But it couldn't. Because every time they touched it now, it touched back. They say karma has no deadline. But in this case, it had a filing number. See, a few weeks back, before the battery drama, before the sprinkler ballet, at 2 a.m., I saw something curious buried in the HOA's quarterly newsletter. Buried between blurbs about gopher control and decorative curb paint. It read, Pinewood Trails HOA is proud to announce submission for the Municipal Green Infrastructure Rebate, a $15,000 award toward sustainable irrigation upgrades. Sustainable. I almost laughed. They were using my power to qualify for a city rebate that required systems to be fully independent of external utilities and homeowner contribution. In other words, no leaching. So while they were busy drying out bathrobes under floodlit front yards, I filed a quiet, anonymous complaint with the Municipal Energy Oversight Board. No rage. No fanfare. Just a polite little packet. A full week of voltage drop logs. time-coded current spikes, photos of the piggyback line, footage of their technician tampering with the box, and a comparison chart showing my solar usage drop aligned perfectly with their nightly sprinkler cycle. I didn't even need to accuse them. I just asked a simple question. Is it within city policy for an HOA to claim rebate eligibility while knowingly sourcing power from a privately installed, off-grid solar system? Apparently, that's the kind of question the board loves to answer. 10 days later, the surprise audit hit. Mid-morning, clipboards, badges, a city inspector, 2 electrical compliance officers, and someone with a tablet they didn't put down the entire time. They didn't come to my door. They went straight to the HOA maintenance closet behind the clubhouse, the one that housed the irrigation controller. By noon, they were at the flower beds. By 12:30, they found the patch box. And by 1:12 p.m., the lead inspector reportedly turned to Diane. Yes, that Diane, board secretary, rebate coordinator, and professional deflector, and asked, "Ma'am, can you explain why this junction box is rerouting draw from a privately metered battery bank registered to a parcel not owned by the association?" Witnesses say she turned the color of skim milk. There wasn't an answer that made sense. Because the city wasn't looking for excuses. They were looking for fraud. Within 48 hours, the rebate was frozen. The HOA's application flagged for ethics review, and their green certification revoked. But the cherry on top? The audit report was public record, which meant local blogs picked it up, then HOA reform groups, then a regional news segment titled, "Eco Rebate or Energy Theft." Local HOA caught tapping residents' solar supply. One resident summed it up best on the community forum. "Guess the sprinklers weren't the only thing running at night. I didn't have to say a word. The power I'd built to live independently, it brought their whole plan into the light." And this time, it didn't shut off at 2 a.m. They held the HOA meeting in the same beige community center they always used. Linoleum floors, fake ficus in the corner, and a wheezing wall-mounted AC unit that hadn't worked right since the Bush administration. I took a seat in the third row, not front and center, that would have been too loud. Just close enough for everyone to see the binder I set down beside me, labeled, in sharp black marker, Power Records, Exhibit AG. Diane was already up front, clipboard in hand, hair pulled tight into a performance bun. She opened the meeting like nothing was wrong, smiling, breezing through old minutes, budget updates, volunteer sign-ups for the Easter egg hunt. And then, Item 9C, resident complaint regarding energy irregularities and irrigation timing issues. She paused, looked at me like she was preparing to swat a mosquito. I stood up slowly, picked up my binder, and approached the podium. Calm, measured, but loud enough to carry. "I'd like to formally enter into record the following documentation," I said, sliding the binder open. "This includes 7 nights of power drain logs, thermal images of unauthorized conduit lines, trail cam footage of your contracted technician accessing my property's solar system without consent, and a time-stamped record of sprinkler system activation correlated to battery output drop." The room went silent. Someone in the back, Mrs. Lambert, I think, whispered, "Is that legal?" Diane cleared her throat, tried to laugh it off. "I believe this is just a misunderstanding, likely a shared circuit mislabel or cross-wiring from the original installation. These things happen." I nodded, then turned to the door, just in time for it to swing open. And in walked Carmen Reyes, regional representative from the Municipal Energy Oversight Board, with a navy folder under one arm and 2 city clerks flanking her. She walked straight to the front, handed Diane a sealed envelope, and announced, clearly, for the record, "As of 3:47 p.m. today, the Pinewood Trails HOA is under formal review for misrepresentation in a municipal green infrastructure rebate, unauthorized energy appropriation, and unlawful utility tap without owner consent." Gasps rippled through the room. All irrigation systems are to be suspended immediately under a cease and desist. A $9,800 fine has been issued for misuse of privately sourced energy, with further penalties pending investigation. Diane's mouth opened, then closed again, like a light bulb flickering just before it dies. Someone clapped, then another, and then the room filled with a slow, steady wave of applause. Not loud, not mocking, just honest. They didn't know what had been happening behind the hedges. But now, they did. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to shout. The numbers, the footage, the city's seal, they spoke for me. Because when you build your own power, no one gets to steal it and call it community management. Not anymore. There's a kind of stillness that only comes after a long stretch of noise. Not just quiet, but stillness. The kind that hums with something whole. That's what the mornings feel like now. The junction box is gone. No more mulch hiding wires. No more inverter buried like a bad secret behind the hydrant. I dug it up myself, just to be sure. Tossed every bit of it into a sealed electronics bin and delivered it straight to the municipal disposal center. Watched it vanish, piece by stolen piece. And just like that, the nights stopped draining. I replaced the old lithium battery with a bigger, stronger model, not out of fear, but pride. Upgraded the inverter, added 2 more panels, and rerouted the system through a load balancer that triggers a load balancer that triggers a low hum when energy bleeds too fast. I haven't heard that hum since the day Carmen Reyes handed over the city's cease and desist. And now, I light up the garden at night. Not for protection. For peace. 12 solar path lights line the gravel walkway from the porch to the side gate. A soft glow that wasn't there before. I installed them after everything settled. A symbolic thing, maybe. But also, just nice. A reminder that this place hums because I made it hum. That the light here is honest. Because sunlight never lies. The HOA president stepped down a week later. Health reasons, they said. I didn't correct them. No one asked me to. The board meetings have been quiet ever since. Fewer flyers, fewer notices taped to mailboxes. No more courtesy visits. No more side glances. A few neighbors started stopping by. Not many. Just enough. Mr. Terrell from 2 lots over brought me a tray of lemon squares. I don't care what kind of panels you run, he said. Just glad somebody stood up. Someone else asked if I could help them look into adding a barrel filtration system like mine. Another person, a quiet teenager I'd never spoken to, just gave me a thumbs up while riding past on a bike. It wasn't applause. It was better. It was understanding. Some mornings I still get up early. Before the sun crests over the ridge, I sit on the porch with my coffee, watching the panel screens blink green as they come alive, sinking to the sky. The light climbs up the trellis first, then spills onto the panels, then into the house, then into me. And I smile, because I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cut wires in anger or call the news. I just had to listen to the system my father taught me to trust. Let the truth charge itself. And when they try to tap it, let justice flow right back down the line. They wired in deceit. I wired in consequence. Now the garden grows. The battery holds. The nights are still. And every time the sun rises, I know they'll never dim this place again. Because this home runs on solar, and silence, and truth, and the kind of light you can't fake, no matter how many bylaws you print. Ever been outnumbered, but never outsmarted? Then you're one of us. Stick around. We don't just tell stories here. We turn quiet resistance into art. Next time someone rewrites your rules, remember, the wiring is already in your hands. And trust me, the next story might just spark something in you.